Headlines. President Park Geun-hye says reducing inter-Korean tensions is the first step toward unification with North Korea in the first meeting of the Unification Preparatory Committee. Seoul and Washington open a new round of talks on delaying the transfer of wartime operational control. And a Saudi man who is being treated for Ebola-like symptoms has died. If confirmed, it would be the first Ebola-related death outside Africa in the latest outbreak. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. Live from Seoul, I'm Kang Tae-ri. President Park Geun-hye continues with her agenda of realizing a peaceful unification of the two Koreas. The Presidential Unification Committee on this Thursday held its very first meeting since being formed last month. Ji Myung-gil reports.
The Park Geun-hye administration has placed a priority on economic reform in recent weeks, but has also shifted its focus back toward a unification drive with North Korea, an initiative that was overshadowed by April's very tragedy and the escalation of provocations out of North Korea. President Park on Thursday ordered members of a newly established 50-member special committee to draw up measures for building up infrastructure in North Korea and improving the lives of the North Korean people as a first step. President Park noted that next year marks 70 years since the peninsula was divided and said the task of preparing for unification could not be delayed any longer. The committee plans to conduct joint government and civilian research for unification and arouse greater public interest in the matter. President Park has said that a reunification of the two Koreas will be an economic bonanza for the peninsula and neighboring countries. During a speech in Dresden, Germany in March, she called for bolstering cross-border exchanges as a first step toward building trust between the rival Koreas and laying the groundwork for unification. The two Koreas have been divided for more than 6 decades following the 1950 to 1953 Korean War, which ended in a ceasefire, not a peace treaty. Ji Myung-gil, ARIRANG News.
Talks on extending the transfer of Washington's wartime operational control over the South Korean military have been ongoing for months now, and Seoul and Washington may be nearing a conclusion to delay the transfer another 5 years to the year 2020. Yoo Rian tells us more.
Talks on transferring the wartime operational control of South Korean forces from Washington to Seoul are underway, and it looks like the transfer will be delayed by 5 years to 2020. Delegations led by Korea's Deputy Defense Minister Ryu Jae-seung and U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for East Asia David Helvey are currently in Washington to discuss the appropriate timing. Sources there say they agree South Korea's military needs more time to bolster its defense and other capabilities to counter threats posed by North Korea. This meeting is crucial as it could be the last round of talks before the two allies announce their agreement at their annual defense ministerial meeting in Washington in October. The U.S. took control of South Korean forces during the Korean War back in the early 1950s. Peacetime control was returned in 1994, and the South Korean military is set to achieve full autonomy next year if it takes over wartime operational control as previously scheduled. But following Pyongyang's third nuclear test in February last year, Seoul had asked Washington to delay the transfer. South Korea's Defense Minister Han Min-gu has also been pointing to the changing circumstances behind Seoul's request, emphasizing that North Korea has been carrying out realistic drills since Kim Jong-un took power in 2012. Yoo Rian, ARIRANG News.
A pro-North Korea daily in Japan says Pyongyang's recent missile launches are meant to protest the U.S. military's presence in South Korea. A piece in the Joseon Shinbo says the tests are a warning against the U.S. and calls for a halt to this month's joint military drills between Seoul and Washington. Comparing Pyongyang's test launches to a shield and the U.S.-South Korea exercises to a spear, the article says the North Korean regime is prepared to fire off its ballistic missiles in defense if necessary. It added the tensions on the Korean peninsula could lead to war. North Korea has test-fired short-range ballistic missiles on 7 different occasions so far this year. North Korea seems to be expanding its nuclear program at its Yongbyon nuclear site, and very actively so. The U.S.-based Institute for Science and International Security said Wednesday that satellite imagery from April and June shows there was an increase in activity surrounding a building known to store centrifuges which are used to enrich uranium. This data suggests Pyongyang might be building more centrifuges inside the building to produce weapons-grade plutonium and enriched uranium for its nuclear weapons program. The institute did add, though, that it wasn't sure whether the construction of the centrifuges had been completed. 2 Korean survivors of Japan's wartime sexual slavery system are visiting the United States, and they're on a mission to make sure Japan pays its long overdue price for its wartime atrocities. Last week, they met with White House officials, and word is that there may be another one coming up next month. Park Geun-hye tells us more.
Quoting diplomatic sources in Washington, Seoul-based Yonhap News and YTN report that the White House will soon hold another round of meetings with 2 Korean victims of Japan's wartime sexual enslavement. Lee Ok-sun and Kang Il-chul, both in their 80s, held closed-door talks with White House officials at the end of last month during a 15-day trip to the U.S., which came to an end on Wednesday. The upcoming meetings will reportedly be attended by the White House officials in charge of foreign affairs policies. It's expected they could place pressure on the U.S. State Department to be more proactive in solving the long-standing issue. International calls on Japan to make amends for forcing women into sexual slavery before and during World War II has picked up in recent weeks. UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Nabi Pillay criticized Tokyo on Wednesday for failing to resolve the issue. In response to Pillay's criticism, Japanese Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga said the issue was covered in a 1965 treaty between Korea and Japan, when Korea received some $800 million in aid and loans as part of the settlement. Pillay, whose term ends this month, emphasized that the women continue to suffer decades later due to the senseless remarks of Japanese officials who continue to deny the atrocities were ever carried out, with some even referring to them as prostitutes. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
The latest military bullying scandal, where a 23-year-old conscript was found to have died after being bullied for months, is still sending shockwaves throughout the country. The head of Korea's Military Human Rights Center held a press conference earlier today. He said the victim, identified only by his family name Yoon, was clinically dead by the time he was transported to a nearby hospital. The center chief also claimed that the Army private was killed primarily as a result of a severe beating by his comrades, and again urged his attackers be charged with murder. He also had some new findings. Take a look.
We found that when the victim was sent to the hospital, one of his attackers said, "If we are asked about the bruises on his chest, let's say he got them while receiving CPR. This is a serious situation."
And Yoon was frequently bullied by his fellow servicemen. He was reportedly forced to hold a horse riding stance until the early hours of the morning, and also told to lick spit off the ground. This is just another in a series of bullying incidents in recent months. An Army sergeant who had allegedly been bullied by his comrades went on a shooting rampage back in June, killing 5.
For the latest in news that impacts Korea and the world, join Kang Chae-ri for a lively half hour that covers politics, business, international news, and much more. Live at 8 every weeknight on ARIRANG TV.
Human Rights Council headquarters in Geneva on Thursday, finding ways to persuade. The Korean government unveiled a new tax revision bill yesterday to help boost domestic demand, but it was also met with some criticism for being more beneficial for conglomerates. Korea's finance minister was quick to respond and defend it, saying measures will ultimately spur economic growth here in Korea. Kim Ji-yeon has the details.
Finance Minister Park Geun-hye defended the government's tax revision on conglomerates, dismissing criticism that the new changes would benefit only the heads of the country's biggest companies. Choi said the proposal is intended to encourage conglomerates to use their cash reserves in ways that would benefit the economy. He said the plan is to boost domestic demand and create a virtuous cycle in which capital flows into households. As a result of conglomerates making investments, paying out dividends, and raising the wages of their employees. Choi says the main reason for the country's sluggish domestic consumption was because household income slowed to a standstill compared to corporate income. Between 2008 and 2013, disposable income among households increased about 30% compared to more than 80% among companies. In the bank, the combined cash reserves among companies was around $460 billion in June, a 44% increase from 2010. The finance minister stressed the need to induce structural changes in order to get the Korean economy back on track. The country's gross domestic product increased a mere 0.6% in the second quarter of the year from the previous quarter, marking its lowest level in 3 quarters. Kim Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
Korea's taxation system is not helping to bridge the gap between the haves and have-nots. That's according to data compiled by the OECD and the National Assembly Budget Office here in Korea. It shows that Korea's poverty rate before taxation was the lowest among 27 OECD countries that were surveyed at 0.17%. However, it drops ever so slightly to 0.15% after taxation, which is higher than the OECD average. In fact, Korea's poverty rate after taxation is similar to countries such as Israel, Chile, and Spain. Other countries' poverty rate showed a wide margin before and after taxation, except in the case of Korea, suggesting the country's taxation system did not do much to bridge the gap between the haves and have-nots. Benefits such as tax cuts being provided to high-income Korean households was pointed out as a likely reason for the minimal impact. Korea's auto industry fared well last month with production, exports, and domestic sales all up. According to trade figures, the output of vehicles stood at nearly 410,000 in July, up 22% on year. The spike was attributed to more working days in July this year and the holiday season falling in August. Outbound shipments jumped 16%, while domestic sales rose 4%. Exports of auto parts also hit a monthly high in July at nearly $2.5 billion. There were multiple factors that caused April's ferry disaster to turn into a national tragedy, really. Chief among them was corruption. More than 40 officials will soon get their day in court on charges of overlooking safety concerns in exchange for money and other personal interest. Connie Kim has the details.
43 officials linked to corrupt activities surrounding the operations of the sunken Seoul ferry have been indicted. Corruption in the marine transport industry has been identified as one of the main causes of the sinking that left more than 300 people dead or missing in April. A special investigation team at the Incheon District Prosecutor's Office says it has indicted officials from the Korea Shipping Association, the Oceans Ministry, the now-defunct Coast Guard, and the Korea Ship Safety Technology Authority. 18 have been arrested and 25 have been charged without detention. Charges against those arrested included the embezzlement of public funds for personal use, giving permission for the ship to operate without regular safety checks, and overlooking illegal acts. An official from the Korea Shipping Association also allegedly ordered those under him to permit the ferry operator to allow more passengers on board than were legally allowed. Other charges among officials who were not arrested included faking a shipping accident for insurance purposes. The prosecution is also calling for the establishment of institutions separate from Korea Shipping Association. It says the agency shouldn't have sole authority over shipping operation. After prosecutors wrap up their investigation into the cause of the sinking and corrupt management within the Korea Shipping Association, it will continue its probe into whether the Korea Shipowners Association lobbied politicians regarding the ferry disaster. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
Wearable technology is all the rage these days, adding extra convenience to our lives. Shipments of wearable devices are expected to top 19 million this year, but there is a downside to this miracle of modern science, and they also come with privacy issues. Kim Min-ji tells us more.
The explosive growth of wearable devices has also brought with it privacy concerns. According to a new report by Korea's National Information Society Agency, there are mounting fears of misuse or abuse of information, as wearable devices are able to collect a variety of personal information regardless of place or time. Front and center is Google Glass, which can record everything in view and share it in an instant. The product's facial recognition app, named Tag, is also raising alarms as a user can get their hands on personal information, including a person's name and their photos on social media, just by taking a photo of them. A U.S. senator has already called on Google to come up with measures so that the application only identifies people who have given the permission to do so. Other countries are also stepping up efforts to protect personal information. The British Data Protection Act prohibits the use of personal information obtained through wearable devices for advertisement or business purposes. Australia also offers detailed guidelines when it comes to privacy invasion through the use of digital devices. Korea, on the other hand, has a lot of ground to make up. Wearable devices do not fall into the category of network cameras or image information processing devices, so relevant laws do not forbid their use. And to be punished by the current information network law, videos must contain pornography or violate privacy or portrait rights. The Korean agency's report points that there needs to be basic standards that can be applied to wearable devices. The Korea Communications Commission acknowledges there is a cause for concern and plans to review relevant laws and regulations. Kim Min-ji, ARIRANG News.
Liberia has declared a state of emergency as it's struggling to contain the deadly outbreak of Ebola. And for more, Paul E. is joining us from the News Center. Paul, health authorities say the disease has now jumped into Central Africa with the latest confirmed case as far as in the Middle East.
Right, and that's what Liberian President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf stressed on Thursday when he spoke about the clear and present danger from this rapidly spreading virus. Sirleaf warned that extraordinary measures were needed for what she described as the very survival of the state, adding that some civil liberties may be suspended over the next 90 days to deal with the epidemic. This as the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says it has issued its highest level alert for the health crisis in West Africa.
Medical doctors now are not getting access to the patients because they have been attacked. So, and then we also wanted to restrict some of the movement so as to be able to give chance to take charge, to be able to control the disease. So I think the state of emergency is in place for the moment to be able to give us chance to deal with the situation effectively.
Meanwhile, the virus is now feared to have spread to the Middle East with the death of a 40-year-old Saudi man under observation for an Ebola infection. New figures released by the World Health Organization show over 932 people have died from the virus, with most cases reported in Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone.
And turning now to Russia, Paul, where President Vladimir Putin has ordered the closure of the country's food market to countries that impose sanctions on Moscow. What kind of impact is this ban going to have for both sides?
Well, experts say it could have severe consequences on European farmers in particular, as Russia is their biggest buyer of agricultural products. The Russian economy is also likely to take a hit as it teeters on the edge of a recession. This as Western powers and Moscow continue to spar over the Ukraine crisis. Our Kwon So-wha has the details.
Responding to the tougher economic sanctions recently imposed on Russia by the EU and the US, Russian President Vladimir Putin has ordered a one-year ban of agricultural produce, food and vegetable imports on nations that have imposed sanctions against Russia. The government has been ordered to come up with a specific list of goods. Russia's move will have a big impact on Western exporters as Russia imports nearly a third of its fruit products from the EU, and the US is its second biggest poultry importer. In an attempt to lessen the impact on domestic consumers, Russian authorities say they are looking for alternative partners. Talks with Argentina, Ecuador and Brazil are already scheduled for this week. Earlier, Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev reportedly said Moscow was considering banning European airlines from flying to Asia over Siberia. The sanctions against Russia began with Russia's annexation of Crimea in March, but were strengthened last week, now targeting Russia's defense, financial and oil sectors. This came in response to Russia's continuous support for pro-Moscow separatists in Ukraine.
We don't know yet whether sanctions are working. Sanctions are working as intended in putting enormous pressure and strain on the Russian economy. If you look at projections for Russian growth, what you're seeing is that the economy has ground to a halt.
Meanwhile, there are concerns Russia could be planning an invasion, as Moscow is believed to have massed some 20,000 combat-ready troops at its border with Ukraine. NATO says Moscow could go in on the pretext of a humanitarian or peacekeeping mission as Kiev gains ground on separatist-held territory. Kwon So-wha, ARIRANG News.
And in other news, a UN court has sentenced 2 surviving leaders of the Khmer Rouge to life in prison after being convicted of crimes against humanity. Paul, can you tell us more about this final verdict?
The UN-backed tribunal found 88-year-old Nuon Chia and 83-year-old Kyo San-pan guilty of crimes against humanity for the 1970s Killing Fields Revolution in Cambodia. Both men were found to be complicit in forced evacuations, mass murders and executions orchestrated by the Khmer Rouge movement led by Pol Pot. Prosecutors said Thursday's ruling was hugely significant, considering the two had escaped judgment for decades.
I thank the court for sentencing these 2 former Khmer Rouge leaders to life in prison. I am very much satisfied with this decision because I suffered so much when I was a prisoner under that regime.
Lawyers representing the 2 men called the verdict unjust and that one of their clients would appeal. They will remain in court to face separate charges of genocide in a second phase of the complex trial. As many as 2.2 million people are believed to have died under the Khmer Rouge between 1975 and 1979.
I see. Now, in this next story, we're talking about one small step for a man and one giant leap for mankind. Paul, I would say scientists at the European Space Agency are celebrating after the Rosetta spacecraft successfully entered the orbit of a comet. Give us details of this landmark space mission.
Well, after spending over 10 years traveling in deep space, the Rosetta spacecraft has become the first man-made object to catch up to a live comet, which is an amazing feat as they can reach speeds of up to 55,000 kilometers per hour. Rosetta was launched by the European Space Agency in 2004 to reach the hurtling piece of ice and rock that was first discovered in 1969. On its journey, the spacecraft circled around the sun in order to pick up speed before being slingshotted past Earth and Mars. Scientists hope the data collected from the comet will unlock some of the secrets of the universe.
So we've had surprises all the way through on this thing, and I predict we'll have surprises right through to the end of the mission. Will we discover life there or aliens? Of course not, but we're going to make major scientific discoveries, and this is going to be a Rosetta Stone for the future of understanding the solar system we live in and the bigger picture. Where do we fit in? Where does life come from?
But the Rosetta's mission isn't done just yet, as it faces an even greater challenge. In November, the European Space Agency plans to attempt to land the probe on the comet's surface. Charity?
All right, in November, we'll be watching that development. Thank you very much for that update, Paul, and we'll see you back here in just about 2 hours.
Good evening, I'm Michelle Park here with the latest weather forecast. It's been a rainy day for us here in Korea, but right now it's mostly centered in Gyeongsangbuk-do province, where up to 60 millimeters is forecast to fall until tomorrow. Now, due to this continuous rain, temperatures have dropped nationwide by an average of 4 degrees. And Typhoon Halong shifted its course a bit, and it's moving further away from Korea, which means it likely won't have much of an effect here as what we thought it would be. Now going over to our temperature readings. Seoul will top out the Friday morning at 23 before reaching up to 32 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Daegu and Busan will top out to 28 and 27 degrees. Now moving over to other regions, Jeju Island tops over to 28, while Dokdo hits 24, while Mangkunggang tops to 25. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and that will do it for this edition of ARIRANG News at 8. Thanks for watching.